It's more lockdown than not, and this is, by the way, the evidence is overwhelming from many studies, both international and comparing states in the United States, that lockdowns do not work to stop the spread of the virus. They're very good at destroying economies. They don't stop the spread of the virus. We've seen, for example, in the United States, we have 50 states. Well, we never had a national lockdown. It went state by state, governor by governor, in some cases mayor by mayor. So we have a pretty good, we have a diverse set of experiences. So there are places like California and New York that had extreme lockdowns. You had a place like Florida, which had more of a moderate lockdown. You have a state like South Dakota, which had no lockdown. The governor said, wash your hands, social distance. If you don't want to go out to a restaurant, that's fine, but we're not going to tell you you can't. We'll make it voluntary. The same thing was true around the world. We saw extreme lockdowns in Italy and Spain and France in the first wave in 2020. We had some countries that did moderate lockdowns. I would put Sweden in that category. And some countries that, at least initially, had no lockdowns. And Brazil is an example of that. So we now have the data. We have the 50 states. We have 30 or more countries around the world. And what the data shows clearly is that there is no correlation between lockdown policy and the spread of the disease. Or put in more statistical terms, the lockdown policy has no material impact on the spread of the virus. Whatever policy you pursue, you get pretty much the same results in terms of caseloads and fatalities. I did another interview earlier today. It was a large international audience, a lot of people from Asia, and one question said, New Zealand had a very severe lockdown and the spread of the disease declined. And couldn't the United States learn from New Zealand? I said, no. I said, I don't doubt that you had a lockdown. I know you had a lockdown. I know the disease declined, but it would have declined anyway. And that's really the point. And we see that from a lot of the data. So lockdowns don't help, but they do destroy economies. And that's what we've seen in New York. Now, they say they're easing up, but let's define that. So restaurants can have indoor seating, but only at 25% of capacity. Sports arenas can have fans in the seats, but only at 10% of capacity, and only if you bring a recent test result with you, like a little QR code on your iPhone, etc. That's tantamount to a lockdown. They say they're easing up, but they're not really easing up. The impact on the economy is devastating, and it's not just a question of a business shutting down and then reopening, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later. A lot of these businesses don't survive. Perhaps half of small businesses are going out of business permanently. Those job losses are not temporary, they're permanent. The owners of, let's say a restaurant or bar, salon, boutique shop, they're closing their doors, breaking their leases, selling their equipment at bargain basement prices, and the workers are never getting their jobs back. Now, eventually those people will get jobs, and perhaps the restaurant owner will move to a different state, move to Florida, and open a new restaurant next year. I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but I am saying it's the end of millions of small businesses, and that's about half the economy in the U.S. So New York, streets are pretty much abandoned. Murder rate has doubled. Crime in the subway is, people are afraid to walk into the subways. Tax base is eroded. There's graffiti everywhere. Stores are still boarded up, some of them. And the city's depopulating. We, in the United States, when you move, I suppose it's true in other countries around the world, when you move, you can go to the post office and put in a notice of your new address, and that way the post office will forward your mail. So mail coming to the old address will be sent to the new address. Through October, from January to October 2020, there were 300,000 of those mail change addresses filed in New York. It's a public record. Well, there's one per household. So if you assume an average household of 3 people, it could be more or less in a particular case, that's upwards of 1 million people leaving New York. And that was through October. I don't doubt that that number is significantly higher today. It's only a city of 8 million, so you have 1 million people moving out. Cities are the greatest wealth creation, wealth generating agglomerations in the history of civilization. and they're depopulating. So you're destroying the wealth generating potential of those cities. And it's not just New York, it's Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Baltimore, and elsewhere.
Do you think a city like New York will ever regain its former status, or do you think it will, from here onwards, only decline?
I think that the decline will continue, partly because of the political leadership. If you don't change the politicians, you should expect more of the same. And a lot of this is irreversible. You know, when a business or an individual moves, you don't move back 6 months later. I mean, you could, I guess, but they're moving. You know, one of the questions you have to ask is, okay, they're leaving New York and the other cities I mentioned. Where are they going? Well, we know they're going to Miami, Austin, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona, and Boise, Idaho, and Denver, among other cities. So there's an exodus out of a lot of cities going to either suburbs or exurbs, or in many cases, other cities. Miami's booming.
So there's a vicious feedback loop then for New York, because as people leave and then companies will close, more people will leave, etc., etc.
Yeah, this is not marginal. This is massive. This is an exodus.
Yeah, and in your book you talk a lot about velocity and monetary velocity, because the first part of the book is about COVID, about the measures, how effective they were, and then the second part of the book is more about the economic consequences of the policies by governments, and especially in the US. Velocity is something that you keep on hammering about. Right now, velocity of M2 has decreased a lot over time, like it halved from a little bit more than 2 to a little bit more than 1. Even though the monetary base has doubled, the Fed balance sheet has doubled, we see that the velocity has halved. So the effect, I guess, is neutral. And without velocity, there's no economy. What would be the best way to increase velocity to make people spend again?
Well, the important thing is that velocity is a psychological concept. It's not a monetary concept. The Austrian economists, monetarists, neo-Keynesians all have the view if you print a lot of money, you'll get inflation. That's just not true. Milton Friedman was wrong about that. It's not the money printing that causes inflation. It's the velocity. It's the turnover of money. And you know, the quantity theory of money is just an identity. People say, well, doesn't that prove if velocity's not constant, doesn't it prove that quantity theory of money doesn't work? No, I mean it doesn't prove that at all. The quantity theory of money is just a definition. It's like saying A equals A. What it proves is that velocity is not constant. You have to, it's good for thought experiments, but as a guide to policy, it's challenging because you can't. What Milton Friedman did, he held velocity constant and said you could dial up or dial down the money supply, and with a cap on real GDP potential and no desire for inflation. If you want P to be 1, Q to be 3.5%, and you hold velocity constant, you just dial the money supply up or down, and you get maximum real growth with no inflation. That was nirvana. The only problem with that is that velocity is not constant. It was a wrong assumption. And we see that, you mentioned them too, but you can, there's slightly different velocity numbers depending on the money supply, whether you use M0, M1, or M2. But M1, the fall is even steeper. It's gone from about almost 11 to 3. It's been cut by 2/3. So yeah, the Fed has doubled the money supply practically, but with velocity dropping like that, the nominal GDP is up barely. Well, it's not up, and we're still below 2019 output levels. So I remind people, $7 trillion times 0 is 0. If you don't have velocity, you don't have an economy. So the question is, how do you get velocity to change? That's psychological. It's based on expectations. You have to get expectations to change. So central banks think that they can do it by holding interest rates at 0. But what message is the central bank sending when interest rates are 0? They're saying that they're worried about deflation. Well, if you're worried about deflation, why should I spend money? I'll just hold on to my money, wait till prices drop, and go buy things more cheaply in the future. Or in fact, the real value of cash increases in deflation, so I'll increase my allocation to cash. I'll increase my savings. So the Fed doesn't understand any of this. They barely, they just don't understand monetary policy. They think they're acting in a stimulus way. They're actually impotent because they can't control velocity, and by holding rates at 0,